My manipulative stepsister was the reason I was kicked out of my home during high school, and now, years later, she's finally facing the consequences of her actions. I'm 26, and I've been engaged to my fiancé, Jeff, for 2 months. We met through a dating app 4 years ago, and since then, we've been inseparable. He's my soulmate, the one person in my life who's never let me down. I haven't exactly had an easy life. My parents divorced when I was just 2 years old. My dad walked away from our family, never once looking back. Sure, he sent child support payments, but that's as far as his involvement went. He never came to see me, never checked in to see how I was doing. My mom, now 48, wasn't much better. She was young when she had me, and she wasn't ready to be a mother. Her priorities were always somewhere else, out with friends, on dates, living the life of a socialite. She never seemed to care much about raising me, leaving me mostly to nannies and babysitters. Growing up, it was like I was an afterthought. My mom made decent money as a freelance artist, but I don't think she ever really thought about me. If it wasn't for the child support checks, I wonder if I would have even been a consideration. She didn't care about being a mother, she just wanted me to grow up and leave her alone. And I did, eventually. At 13, she met my stepfather, Matt, who was 50. He had a daughter my age, Jess, and when they first started dating, my mom was unusually invested. She told me to be on my best behavior, something she'd never said before when bringing boyfriends around. It was strange, I had never seen her care this much about anything to do with me. When Matt and his daughter Jess moved in with us, it didn't feel like much of a shift at first. I didn't care much about their presence as long as they left me to my peace. But soon, it became permanent, and that's when things started to change. My mom told me I had to share my room with Jess. I wasn't having it. That room was the only place in that house where I had any peace, and I wasn't going to give it up for someone I barely knew. I put my foot down, but my mom didn't take it well. She told me she'd kick me out if I didn't do what she said. At 14, I might have been young, but I knew the law. I knew she couldn't just kick me out. I was still a minor, and I made that clear. She was bluffing. She didn't like that, but she backed down, and Jess got the basement room instead. It wasn't great, but my mom made sure it looked decent. In the end, it didn't matter how nice it looked because that's when Jess started hating me. I didn't understand it at first. Why would she be upset? But my mom made an announcement during the house tour that Jess would be in the basement because I refused to share my room. I didn't get why she'd say something like that, maybe to guilt me, maybe to stir up drama. It worked. Jess didn't let it go, and from that moment on, she treated me like I was her enemy. She'd still spend half the month with her mother, but the days she was with us, those were torture for me. She made sure to make my life miserable. She'd say the cruelest things, like laughing and telling me my dad probably left my mom because of me. It was as if she found joy in seeing me hurt. She'd mock my appearance, since I wasn't exactly skinny, and even in school, she'd bully me with her clique of friends. They would ignore me at best, or worse, join in on the taunting. The worst part? I hadn't even done anything to deserve this. Her reason for hating me was ridiculous. She couldn't handle the fact that I refused to share my room with her. My room, my one piece of solace in that house, and she wanted to take it. The irony is that if she had taken even a second to get to know me, I might have shared it with her. But she didn't. She was a stranger to me, and I wasn't about to give up my peace for someone I didn't trust. I never told my mom or Matt what was going on. It was pointless. They knew and did nothing. They didn't care about me. No matter what Jess did, they'd always turn a blind eye. I was the problem, not her. I learned quickly that if I fought back, I'd just get in trouble. Jess would cry, and she'd get away with everything. Meanwhile, I'd be grounded for daring to defend myself. It wasn't fair, but that's how it was. I could never do what Jess did, cry on command, manipulate situations. But somehow, I always ended up being the one reprimanded for my behavior, told I needed to start treating her like a sister. Meanwhile, she got off scot-free, and I was left to face the consequences. It felt like a nightmare, a place I hated living in. But when my 18th birthday came and I was kicked out, I was surprisingly relieved. I had endured years of my family's madness, and it had only gotten worse over time. Jess was still a nightmare, and my parents continued to blindly support her, never once questioning her actions. She had managed to turn our entire high school against me, leaving me with barely a few friends who would speak to me. Everyone else hated me just because she did. And that was enough. The toll on my mental health had been immense. I was sinking into a hole that felt impossible to escape. My weight had ballooned from binge eating, and it showed. Acne spread across my face, and my hair looked a mess. I was also failing at school, barely scraping by. So not only did I feel like I looked awful, but I was also perceived as dumb. It was like I had nothing going for me. Nothing at all. At home, it was no better. I still had to live with Jess, my parents, and the unbearable tension. My mother, especially, was becoming more insufferable with each passing day. She would constantly compare me to Jess, even though she knew full well that it was Jess who had made my life miserable. Things had been bad before my mother married Matt, but they weren't as awful. After the wedding, it was like I had gone from the frying pan into the fire. My mother didn't just stop caring about me, she actively made me feel worthless. It felt like I was living in a house full of mean girls. It couldn't have been more obvious to me that Jess was the daughter my mother actually wanted. I was just the unfortunate one who got stuck in this life. They wanted me gone. And honestly, I wanted the same. Jess and my mom hated me, and Matt couldn't have cared less. My family was practically non-existent, my grandparents weren't in touch, and I never knew my father. So, I was alone, with nowhere to go, and I felt awkward asking friends for help. All I could do was stay with my mom, because at least I had a roof over my head and food to eat until I turned 18, at least. Then, just a couple of weeks before my birthday, everything changed. An incident happened that led to me being kicked out, and that day will forever be burned in my memory. It was a weekend, and I can still remember every detail. It was one of the most traumatic and stressful days of my life. Jess had started hanging out with a larger group of people after graduation. She was dating her friend's older brother, who was in his last year of college, and she spent time with his friends, who were all older than us. I knew what kind of trouble they were getting into, drinking, smoking, who knows what else, but I didn't bring it up. With my luck, it would have backfired, so I kept quiet. I wasn't into any of that. For one, I didn't have friends cool enough to even access alcohol or cigarettes, let alone drugs. And honestly, I had enough problems of my own, my weight, my grades. I didn't need to add alcohol and drugs to the mix. But that day, I made a mistake. I must have left my room unlocked before I went for a shower, and before I knew it, I heard banging on the bathroom door. My mother was screaming at me to come out right now. I rushed to throw on some clothes, barely able to comprehend what was happening. When I stepped out of the bathroom, my mother, Matt, and Jess were standing in my room. They all wore serious expressions, and I instantly felt a cold chill run down my spine. My mother pulled out a bunch of empty beer bottles from under my bed and, worse still, a huge plastic bag full of what I knew had to be weed. I knew it didn't belong to me. Jess knew it didn't belong to me. But my parents didn't. They just assumed it was mine. Somehow, Jess must have planted it in my room while I was in the shower and then told my mother about it. They exploded. My mother screamed at me, furious, accusing me of being a horrible person. Not only was I in trouble for the alcohol and drugs, but she started attacking me on every front. She ranted about me eating all the food, wasting her money, and how I was never going to amount to anything. I tried to explain, over and over, that I had no idea how it got there, but she wouldn't listen. When I suggested maybe Jess had planted it to get me in trouble, my mother completely lost it. She screamed at me for being jealous of Jess, claiming I could never be as good as her at anything. I broke down, crying uncontrollably, but even that didn't seem to matter to her. She just kept yelling. Eventually, she stopped screaming, but her words still hit like a blow. "You have to go," she said. I was in shock. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. She didn't care. She just wanted me out. She told me if I didn't leave that day, she would call the cops on me. She made it clear she didn't want an addict living under her roof, using her money, and that I had to look after myself. I begged her, pleaded with her, but she was unmoved. She told me if I didn't pack up and leave, she would have the police come. My heart sank. The sheer coldness of it. The heartlessness. And what really shocked me? Matt and Jess didn't seem to care at all. They went on with their day as if nothing had happened. After hours of crying and begging, I started packing. As horrible as it was, I knew I had no choice. I'd rather live on the streets than be arrested for something I didn't do. I was done packing by evening, and when I left, nobody said goodbye. I didn't turn back either. I went to a park and sat on a bench for a while, but it started to get cold. I had nowhere to go. That night, I went to Amy's house, hoping she would let me crash there. She already knew what my home life was like, so I didn't need to explain much. I told her everything that had happened, and she was horrified. She insisted I tell her parents, and after some reluctance, I did. They were just as shocked as she had been. Amy's parents got on the phone with my mom, trying to talk some sense into her, but she was rude and dismissive. They realized talking to her wouldn't help. Then, they did something I will never be able to fully thank them for. They offered me a place to stay, permanently, if need be. They told me I could live with them as long as I needed. They were wealthy, so money wasn't an issue, and Amy insisted on sharing her room with me. I spent the next couple of years living with them, attending community college, and working to save up for my own place. Amy's parents made sure I never felt pressured to leave and did everything they could to make me comfortable. I had finally saved enough to move out, a huge milestone. I felt a surge of pride, mixed with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Amy and her parents, without them, I wouldn't have made it. They had been my rock. On the day I moved, they were right there, helping me settle into my new place, reassuring me that I was always welcome. Whether I needed to visit or even move back in, their doors were open. It felt like the moment my life shifted, everything was coming together. By then, I had lost a lot of weight. My health had improved dramatically, and I felt amazing. I looked better too, and the confidence that came with that was indescribable. For the first time in years, I was earning enough to support myself. I had put in the hard work, physically and emotionally. I had taken the time to focus on myself, and I realized I was ready for more. I wanted to date, to explore the possibility of finding someone to settle down with. After all, the goal was marriage eventually, so it made sense to start looking. Before Jeff, I had met a few guys. Each one seemed promising at first, but something always fizzled out before it could really go anywhere. And then I met Jeff. Finally, I understood. All those previous guys? They were just stepping stones, experiences meant to teach me something. But with Jeff, it felt different. I knew he was the one. When we started dating, I had no idea Jeff was rich, that he was set to inherit his dad's successful chain of restaurants. I wasn't interested in him for his wealth, I liked him for who he was. He was funny, charming, and cute, and I felt like he really liked me too. It was simple, unpretentious. We didn't need anything else. A couple of months into our relationship, he told me about his family, and that's when the reality hit me. He wasn't just any guy, he was the heir to a fortune. But it didn't change anything for me. I didn't love him for his money, I loved him for who he was. I still saw him as the guy I had met, the guy who made me laugh. That knowledge didn't shift my feelings one bit. A year into our relationship, we moved in together. He introduced me to his family, and they welcomed me with open arms. It felt perfect. Everything was falling into place. So when he proposed, the answer was obvious. Yes. 2 months into our engagement, everything seemed perfect until I received an email from Jess. 8 years. That's how long it had been since I'd heard from her or anyone in my family. I had no idea why she would reach out now, especially after everything that had happened. What had changed? I opened the email, and the words hit me like a punch to the gut. Jess was apologizing for everything, admitting that she had been a nightmare. She actually acknowledged that she had planted things in my room to get me kicked out. For no reason at all, she had hated me. Why? I had no idea. So why was she telling me this now, after all this time? The timing was strange. I had just gotten engaged, and I knew she must have heard about it. I had posted about it on social media, and we went to the same high school. People still talk, even after years. So, when I read her message, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to dig deeper. And what I uncovered shocked me. Jess's husband was the owner of the business that supplied plastic containers for Jeff's restaurants. It was an easy connection to make. All I had to do was create a fake profile and dig through their social media. In no time, I had everything I needed to put the pieces together. I had known about Jeff's business plans for a while, since we were planning to run it together once his father retired. I was already learning the ropes, so it wasn't hard to make the connection. When I found out that Jess's husband was involved with us in that way, I had to tell Jeff. I hadn't thought about my past much in the last few years. I wanted to move on. I had distanced myself from everyone in my family online, and I had even asked my friends not to update me on their lives. So I had no idea that Jess had married or that her husband had been working with Jeff's company. But once I learned that, there was no going back. Jeff and I decided to cancel the contract. It wasn't worth it. And honestly, after everything, I couldn't stomach the idea of having any kind of relationship with Jess, especially not in business. Jeff had been talking about dropping her husband for a while anyway. The quality of the products had been slipping, and they were already considering alternatives. So it was easy for us to decide to sever ties. We didn't need that connection. Jess didn't take it well, of course. After the contract was canceled, she started accusing me of doing it out of spite. Her social media was a mess. She posted about how we had done this just to get back at her, and she tagged our business in it. The whole thing was turning into a public spectacle. She even mentioned how she and her husband had been losing clients, and in her eyes, this was just the last straw. At first, I felt a pang of guilt. But then, I realized this wasn't personal. Yes, there were old wounds, but this was also professional. Jeff and his dad had every right to drop a supplier who was charging them too much and not delivering quality products. Jess's husband had been running his business poorly, and that's why we had to move on. Still, Jess couldn't let it go. She kept posting about it. She claimed it was all because of me, but I knew the truth. It wasn't just about me. It was about bad business. So, Jeff and his dad decided to take action. They were going to pursue a defamation lawsuit. The accusations had gone too far. I couldn't believe it. Jess, after all these years, was still trying to drag me back into her mess. And now, she was trying to hurt us in business. It was infuriating. But instead of letting it affect me, I blocked her. I wasn't going to let her or her drama into my life again. But then, my mom decided to get involved. She started defending Jess again. It was like I was back in high school, trying to keep my head down while my mom played favorites. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need any of them. I blocked her too. My life was moving forward, and nothing was going to stop me from marrying Jeff, the man of my dreams. The past was behind me, and there was no room for it in my future. And then, the legal battle began. Jeff and his father filed the defamation lawsuit, and it was only a matter of time before things started to fall into place. We met with the mediator, and soon after, we won. Jess and her husband had to pay for what they said. And now? Now we could finally focus on what mattered, our wedding. My heart raced every time I thought about it. I was marrying the love of my life. The one I had been waiting for all these years. And this time, nothing and no one was going to get in the way.